An individual in our shamanic community recently asked me a very interesting question. What are the similarities and differences between shamanism, shamanic practice, and witchcraft? And I really didn't have a good answer. But almost immediately, a friend of mine, whose name is Zoe Sol, who identifies as a witch, came to mind. So I reached out to Zoe and I asked if she would be interested and willing to have a discussion with me about that subject. And she said, sure, that sounds like fun. So before we dive into the issue of witchcraft, let me share a little bit about Zoe so you can get some context. Zoe Sol is an intuitive channeler, a vocalist, poet, and witch. She discovered her gifts, like many of us, in early childhood, but did not come back to fully develop these gifts until young adulthood, when she found her path as a modern witch. Since then, Zoe has used witchcraft in her spiritual practice to facilitate growth, healing, and connection to her roots. Her mission on this planet is to reconnect people with their own inner magic so that they can experience their own power and divinity as spiritual beings in this world. And besides that, she is a fun and wonderful person. So with that, let's dive right in. What are the similarities and differences between shamanism, shamanic practice, and witchcraft? I think one thing that we probably ought to state up front is that neither one of us is the authority in our approach to spirituality. You know, there's a lot of different flavors of shamanism. It's a global worldview. And so what I have to say is only relevant to my experience and to my training and my teaching. And I would hazard guess that Zoe would say the same thing about hers. Would you think that that's true?
Yeah, definitely not the authority. It's just a perspective.
Okay. So just we're clear about that. So there's a lot of different labels for the things that we do. What is witchcraft, and how would you define the practice that you do? And thumbnail sketch.
Yeah. So, witchcraft is basically it's a practice of using magic to set an intention. It can be used for healing. It can be used to manifest something. It can be used to release or let go of something. But it's basically using magic to move forward in your life. And you can do that using ritual or spell work. You can use incantations, but you don't necessarily have to. There are many different forms of witchcraft, and there's many ways to go about it. In terms of being a witch, I know that that's not what you asked, but oftentimes people conflate the two. You don't actually have to be a witch to practice witchcraft. You can be practicing witchcraft and not be a witch. You can, if you're lighting a candle and you're meditating on that candle and setting an intention, that actually is a form of spell work. And so, by definition, you're practicing witchcraft, even if you're not a witch. In terms of being a witch, there are many, many different paths to being a witch. You have like your witches that were born into it. So those are people that you'll think, that are like in Santeria or voodoo. These are generally people that grew up in the tradition. And then you have more of your neo-pagans, people that are going to practice like, you'll hear terms thrown around like, what is a green witch? Well, that's somebody who works specifically with herbs and the earth. I myself identify as an eclectic fairy witch. The eclectic part is basically that what I do is I don't follow one specific tradition. I kind of pick and pull from different paths and different spiritualities to create one for myself. And then the fairy part is that I work with elementals, I work with nature spirits, and I work with the fae. So witches is a big, broad term, but it basically defines anybody who is using witchcraft in their spiritual practice.
Okay, thank you. Actually, that maps pretty well, I think, to my experience or whenever people ask me questions about what is shamanism, it's like
Mm-hmm.
it's a worldview. It's not a thing.
Yeah.
Don't get certified as a shamanic practitioner or as a shaman in particular. And I got all kinds of things to say about that. But
Yeah. I actually want to ask you a little bit about that.
okay, sure. What we're doing, folks, is we are sharing hosting of this conversation. So I'll be tossing questions, and so will Zoe, and that's more fun, I think. So,
Yeah.
did you have something you wanted to say or ask?
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious because one of the things that I am, it's interesting because the first time I got introduced to shamanism was actually years ago. I dated a guy who was Native American, and he introduced me to danza, which is the Native American dancing, and how to have an altar. And he kind of introduced me to these concepts early on, but I was very afraid to take that on for myself because of cultural appropriation. I know that I have Native blood in me somewhere, but I don't really know where, and I don't know how far back. And so it just didn't feel right to take that on. And yet, now that I'm older and after having met you and kind of getting a sense of how big the community is, I realized that, you don't have to be Native American. You don't have to be from a specific lineage. And so I want to ask you a little bit about like, what is a shaman? Like, what exactly is a shaman, and how do you need to come from a tradition, or do you need to have special training for it?
Um, Fair question, and it will take me a few days to actually answer it. I do have a number of videos on YouTube that directly address that, as particularly the dilemma of being a white guy in America who is practicing shamanic practices or doing shamanic practices. And I've done a lot of thinking about that.
Mm-hmm.
And a number of people that I know are Native American, and some of them they're mad at me because
Mm.
they don't believe that I or any white person um, should have any right to do anything that I'm doing. I have a little difficulty with that because if that is true, then it undercuts spirituality almost completely, because
Right.
I have no roots in that sense. I mean, I can go back and in my ancestry, and I can point out that um, my heritage is Irish and British and Viking. I can do
Mm-hmm.
that, but I
Mm-hmm.
don't have the same sort of line as many Native Americans do. So I understand the question. I understand the issue, and I'm very sensitive to it to the extent that I can. On the other hand, I've also run into a number of people that I consider to be teachers who basically said, Spirit says the teachers need to come down out of the mountain, and we need to share this information with other people. It can't just be our information. So uh, here we have both sides of this coin, and shamanic practitioners like myself are sitting right on it, right on the edge of that coin, trying our best to use the practices that we've been taught and given permission to use through that teaching, and still be respectful of the lineages from which they come. It's like there's not a single lineage in our culture. There's
Yeah.
not a single lineage for us. And so what we find ourselves having to do is sort of what you were saying earlier, is like look at the different lineages there are, the different teachings that are there, and find the ones that are as universally accepted as possible. As an
Mm-hmm.
example, drumming happens all over the planet. Every shamanic tradition that I've ever encountered has some aspect of drumming or flute playing or rattling or dancing. They're all, it's global. So there's not a lineage to it, it's everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't sing Native American songs because I, number one, haven't been taught them, and number two, don't have permission. So
Mm-hmm.
that's not part of my practice. But what I can find in terms of shamanic tradition gives me some tools that I can actually use. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so while I understand and appreciate the idea of appropriation, I try to be really careful about that.
Mm-hmm.
And so to get right back to your point about what is a shaman, very traditional about that. And you introduced me as a shaman, and I've just stopped arguing with people. I don't
Mm.
consider myself a shaman at all. because I don't have the same kind of teaching and lineage that a traditional shaman would have. I didn't grow up as an apprentice, for example. I didn't spend like 30 years or 40 years as an apprentice to a shaman. I didn't get to do that. And in our culture, that's not supported. So I think that the term and the definition of shaman starts right there, is that long apprenticeship in which you learn how to bring balance to the tribe. You learn how to bring balance to the people in the tribe. And so that's what a shaman is. Like I said, people call me a shaman all the time. I just stopped arguing. I know for myself that I'm not a shaman. I am a shamanic practitioner because that's what I do. And I'm okay. Okay. So there's kind of the difference in my. Okay. So I guess that's some background on both of our traditions, eh?
Yeah. That's interesting. And you know, I know a little bit about shamanism, and not as much as you do, but I do know something about it. And I do know that you're right. It comes from many different parts of the world. And what's interesting is that witchcraft is very similar. And I feel like if you go back far enough, there's all kinds of mystic traditions. And these mystic traditions, it's like, I feel like we're kind of sitting at a time, and you touched on it, where our world needs it. And so whatever form that takes, and if it's healing and it's working, I'm of the opinion of use it. You know, spirit is not, you can't cage it. It's not meant to be like held and caged and owned. I think it's meant to share. So I'm really grateful that you do what you do. I think that you do it with immense integrity, and I know that it's helped me a lot. So thank you.
Yeah, well, you're welcome. I do wonder, a question comes up about, how did you decide that witchcraft was your path? How did that come about?
You know, ever since I was really little, I was always very, very spiritual. And I remember being a child, and I would see things like I would see little lights, or I'd see little shadows. And I think most children are very intuitive because they don't have that, you know, that guard up, or that thing that's telling them, you know, what's real and what's not. They're open to all possibility. And so I was just a very open kid. And I remember being little and playing with fairies and just talking to them. It wasn't even a thought to me that they weren't real. They just were real. They were part of my reality. And I had a tree that I had named Malcolm, and I would sit under the tree and talk to the tree and just have conversations with it. And I even created like little altars, little offerings. I didn't know what it was. As an adult, I can look back and say, oh, that was spell work. That was altars. That was this, that was that. But as a child, I was just engaged in play. And it was very natural for me to do that. And I kind of forgot about that as I grew older. But then I mentioned earlier that I dated this guy who was Native American. And when we were dating, he had this beautiful altar set up. And I remember asking him about it. And he talked to me about the 4 directions. He talked to me about what the altar represented, his ancestors. And I thought it was so beautiful. And it was kind of like, you know, when you hear someone speak a truth that is it just resonates with your soul, and you get that feeling of like, this is like, it's more than just knowing up here. It's like a knowing in your body where it feels right and it sits with you right. So as he was sharing this, it all felt right. And it kind of reawakened something in me. And we took a little vacation to Salem, Massachusetts, and we went into this Wiccan shop, this witch shop. And up until that point, you know, my experience of witches were just like on TV. I grew up Catholic, so my parents were very, very conservative. And so their view of witches were that they were Satan worshipers. That was my view. And so I didn't have any real idea of what a witch was. And we walked into the shop, and there was this beautiful old crone with silver hair, this little old lady, quintessential, like who you want to meet as a witch. We walk in, and her and him start talking because he's picking up the tools, and they start having this conversation. And what's funny is they had the conversation that you and I are having right now. And the conversation was sharing their paths and the differences and the similarities. And as she began talking, that's where I felt it land in my body. Like, I just need to know more. And at that point, I started diving into literature and just, getting as much information as I could about witchcraft. And, one of the things that I love about it is growing up very Catholic. I kind of grew up in this patriarchal culture, and it was this very like top down culture where, I had to go through the priest, and I had to go through certain, channels to gain access to this higher power, to the source energy. And, and then, as I mentioned, it was patriarchal. But as I started to study witchcraft, it was flipped on his head. It was like, well, no, the power, you have access to spirit. It's all right there, and it's found in nature, and it's found in you. And so that was not a new concept for me, because I always kind of felt that, but it was validating everything I had felt. And then it's very honoring of the feminine. And it's really there's a lot of equality, and a lot of feminists appreciate witchcraft because it really brought to light the sacred feminine. It brings to light the sacred feminine. And I do identify as a feminist. So for me, it felt really good to be part of a culture and a tradition that really honored the female and put the sacred feminine up just as high as the sacred masculine, and where they could both work together in harmony. I could go on and on, but those were two really big things for me. And the last bit I'll say that I really enjoy about it is I do like the little bit of edge and the little bit of rebellion that is kind of there in the word witch. Like, when you say you're a witch, people's ears prick up, and they kind of go, "You're what? Huh?" And what I enjoy about that is that, you need to ask questions and get curious to find out the truth about what that means. And so it's, I don't know, I find it at least entertaining.
Let's take a couple of minutes of a break and then get back to our interview and discussion with Zoe Sol.
So, Gerry, I have a question for you.
Okay.
Well, we both work with spirit, and I am kind of curious what the intersections are, like where it's similar in how we work with spirit and where it's different. And I want to ask you a little bit about how you work with spirit, what that looks like for you. And yeah, if you could just kind of elaborate on that, that would be great.
My answer to that, my definition of spirit is that which is bigger than I am. So from the shamanic worldview, everything is alive, everything is spirit, and there's that approach is part of what it is that attracted me to shamanism in the first place. Um, the idea that everything is sacred, that everything is spirit, that everything is alive really resonates with me. And I studied that for years now, trying to figure out what that means. And I've become convinced that if we really understand individually, if you really get what it means, that everything is alive, it changes you.
Mm-hmm.
You can no longer be in the world the same way you were before that recognition, because everything then becomes sacred.
Mm-hmm.
And so if everything is sacred, you can't dishonor anything. I mean, period. If everything is alive, you can't dishonor anything.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, spirit permeates all existence. It permeates me. It permeates my environment. It permeates the people that I meet. And I can sometimes get pretty emotional about it because I feel it. You know, I
Mm-hmm.
meet someone and I can feel spirit just sort of oozing from them. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't really answer the question definitively, what is spirit, except that it's bigger than I am and it permeates everything. Okay. That's the best I can do. That's kind of like the force, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and if you don't mind, let me just sort of turn that back on you. What does that mean to a witch? What is spirit?
Yeah.
Is that a spiritual tradition, or is that?
Yeah. So again, I mean, as we mentioned, I'm not an authority, so I can only talk from my perspective because there's going to be a lot of different opinions on this depending on the witch, because there actually are witches that are atheist, if you can believe it. Like, it's, to me, that it's like, how can you be an atheist witch? But you can practice spell work and you can practice craft without believing in, without needing to believe in a spirit, spirit of any form. Now, for me, I definitely believe in spirit, and the way that I look at it is actually very similar to you. I look at spirit is the energy that's all encompassing. It's force. Like, it's so big. It's bigger than our mind can wrap its head around. Like, it's bigger than what we can comprehend. And so I think what we do as human beings is we fragment it and we make it smaller and we diminish it so that it becomes digestible. So in witchcraft, the way that I look at it is there's different deities that are representing different aspects of spirit. So you have your archetypes. It's basically like a mythology of archetypes. And these archetypes are different aspects of spirit, so that if, let's say, I am really focused on love and relationships, I might work with Venus or Aphrodite because that is, a goddess of love, and that's what she specializes in. And what's really interesting to me about this is that it's very similar to Catholicism, because in Catholicism, you have your saints. But then when you go back far enough, you can actually see that these are pagan practices that have been covered up, through the church, so that it was more, so that they could deliver it to the people, the peasants, and they would actually take it and work with it. So back in the day, when the Catholic Church was kind of coming over and ravaging the pagan cultures, a lot of the people continued their pagan practices under the guise of working with this saint or that saint. So it has its roots in paganism. And going back to, what is spirit, I feel like all of these labels, all of these deities, all of these, things that we use to call upon spirit, they are just masks of the bigger thing. And they are just vehicles and channels for us to have access to that big, giant, incredible thing. And like you, I do believe that it is all encompassing. One of the things about being a fairy witch is that it's also very animistic, meaning that we also believe that everything has an energy. In fact, one of the practices, I just recently moved, is that when you enter into a new home and you come into a new space, you make friends with the land spirits. And you can go in like Iceland. They actually have people that communicate with the elves, and the government actually believes and works with these people. And before they are going to build anything on land, they have these people go in and they talk to the elves, which are essentially the land spirits, to get permission to build on the land. And if they say no, they listen. They go, okay, well, they said no. And so it's that idea that, yeah, there are spirits there. I think for us, it can manifest in form, like there are land spirits, there are house spirits. But that idea that the spirit is everywhere and it's in everything and everything has energy, I also subscribe to that 100%.
Yeah, and what you were saying reminded me of a practice that, it's really something that anybody can do at any time. But it's like the best example is doing a house clearing, for example, going in and clearing the energy of a house. I like to do it before people move in, but sometimes you can't do that. And sometimes something happens and you need to go do the house clearing to help clear that energy, right? And part of it, the ritual or the work that I do is that I sit with the owner, the house, well, I'm going to call it owner, although that's a weird relationship. And I say, what is it that you want from the house? What are you looking for from the house? And they tell me, they sometimes have to make things up, and that's okay. But then I say, okay, so what are you willing to offer to the house? What is the relationship? What's the contract that you want to have with this living being that is your house? And that opens it. I think it opens a dialogue between the person and the home or in the house. And if they follow through with that, then they can have an ongoing working relationship together. Same with the house, same with the land, same with the trees, all of it. And so I think there's a direct mapping between what you were saying and what I'm suggesting in terms of the practical value of having relationships with everything that's around you. So that's one way that we're very similar.
Yeah.
Just kind of approach it differently. That's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so glad that you're saying this, because this is not for, this idea isn't for all witches. Like, all witches don't believe this. But one of the things that drew me specifically to the fairy path is, as I was reading up on it and just gathering more information about it, there's a lot of, in a lot of traditions, there's a lot of emphasis placed on deities. Like, I am going to connect with Athena, or I'm going to connect with the goddess Diana. And that's fine. I have my deities that I work with, but I connect more with nature spirits. And as I was beginning to understand more about this path, there is more emphasis placed on the spirits that are directly around you. And the way that it was described was like, if you are in an environment, don't you want to know your neighbors? Don't you want to know who's there with you? And don't you want to have a good relationship with them? And so it's really about exactly what you said, having relationship with your environment and respecting and honoring that your environment is alive and that there is a consciousness there that you can interact with.
Is there I think we referred to it a little bit earlier, but is there a healing component in the work that you do?
Yes. So for me, absolutely. Again, not all witches. Some witches just use spell work from a more, in my opinion, a more selfish place, where it's more about like, oh, I want to manifest the next job, or I want to manifest love. And you can do that and you can have success at it. But I think that most witches, actually most of the witches that I've met, have a spiritual path. They've chosen it because they're wanting to evolve themselves and grow themselves spiritually. And I think that if that's your intention, healing is just baked right into that. You have to do healing work. And so we do a lot of healing work for ourselves. And then I would say that, you can do it in ceremony and in a group setting. There is quite a bit of that as well. But there are some people that are solitary, which means that they only work, they work alone. They work with themselves. They don't work with community. And so it kind of goes both ways. So the answer is yes, but not always.
Yeah, I understand. That's pretty much the same answer that I would give, as that we're shamanic practitioners are different. We've been taught different things. Some people do soul retrieval and some don't, you know, and some people work in large groups and community circles and some don't.
Mm-hmm.
It's there is a healing component for sure in shamanic work, because the shamans think about health and illness as being in or out of balance.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're ill, there's some part of you that is out of balance, and that gives you something then to work on. So you find what's out of balance, you find ways to bring it back into balance, and by doing that, you bring some sense of healing
Mm-hmm.
into the situation. And the healing can be personal, you know, physical, it can be mental, it can be emotional, it can be with
Mm-hmm.
your family, it can be with the environment. You know, you can be out of balance with the environment as well, or out of balance with your culture even. And so all of that shamans would call illness. And so, as you said, baked right into it is the
Mm-hmm.
concept of healing. And it's about helping people to be in balance with themselves and their environment. So
Right. Yeah, that's great. I'm curious because it kind of leads to the next question, which is really about community. And in my mind, I just always thought that like to do shamanic work, community was just a big part of it, and you had to be part of community. But now I'm wondering if that's true. Can you talk a little bit about the role that community plays in shamanism?
there's one way of thinking about shamanism or shamans in shamanic practice uh, that suggests that there's no such thing as a shaman without a community. There's no place for a shaman without community,
Mm-hmm.
because the shaman's role is in the community, and the shaman's role is to help keep balance of what's going on. And if you're thinking about a solitary shaman in the woods somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
keeping balance between himself or herself and nature, well, it's one thing. But some people would argue that that's not really a shaman at all. That's more like
Mm-hmm.
a mystic or a hermit. But
Mm-hmm.
there's something about the shamans that is very much about community. And frankly, all the people that I know who are shamanic practitioners, or that I even recognize as an actual shaman, are all part of a community. They all are,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's a
Mm-hmm.
global community, because some of these folks just travel all over the place.
Yeah.
But they usually have a place that they call home. And if they don't have a place to land and put their feet in the dirt, for a lot of them, they just kind of like lose touch.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of see them like kites, you know?
Yeah.
So there's something really important about place, about community, and the relationships that those things lead to, that is a core of shamanic practice. Now, again, going back to you and I both saying we're not representative of everything,
Mm-hmm.
but for the people that I know, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yeah.
recognize that I hear the word coven quite a lot in its relationship to witches. Is that kind of like a family, or is that a community, or how does that work?
Yeah, so there are open covens and there's closed covens. I am part of a closed coven. And what a coven is it's basically a group of witches that come together to do spell work, to do ritual, to do ceremony. And so in a closed coven, it's, I have 3 other members in my coven, so there are 4 of us, and we don't let anybody else in. It's just us. We get together, we do our rituals, we keep it closed. And it really is like a family, because when you're being that vulnerable spiritually and you're sharing that spiritual space, there is just kind of like a stripping away of all of the layers that happens, where you're exposed in a really beautiful way and your authentic self starts to emerge. And so feeling safe in that is really important. And that's why I choose to have a closed coven, because I like the safety. I like I like to feel very safe, and I like to feel that I'm, going to be respected and taken care of when we go into ritual and ceremony, and I can go as deep as I want to go and as I'm ready to go. Now in an open coven, Usually it will have like a group of its core members that are practicing rituals, but people are free to come and go as they please. And in that coven, generally, I've participated in open covens before, and they're also really great. But I find that with open coven, you can't. I myself couldn't go quite as deep, just because, you know, there's a little bit of a guard having people that, you know, maybe you are not as close with. So it's a little less intimate, in my opinion. And then you have giant group rituals, which is like, you know, you might go to an event, a pagan event or a witch event, and they'll do a group ritual and everybody's invited, everyone in the community is invited. So yes, a coven, and that wouldn't be a coven, that would just be a group ritual. A coven is a group of designated people that are coming together with the purpose of doing magic.
Let's take another short break and get back to our discussion in just a couple of minutes. And what you're describing, you've been to some of our community events, and what you're describing, the open coven, sounds a great deal like what we talk about in terms of a community.
Right.
It would be like an open community. Anybody can come and go, but there are certain things that we want to do where we really would like to hold a better container. So people who are not part of the community they're not invited. But we can hold the circle and the container in such a way that it's safe, because the work that we do, we being you and me, is very powerful. And so we both, as far as I understand, we both work pretty hard to create a container for that energy and a place to hold the energy and the safety of the people who are participating. So I appreciate that. That's something that I hadn't thought about before, the idea of an open coven, and how that maps to what I think of as our shamanic community, or the groups that we attend. Like I said, you've been to some of ours. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah. And I also just want to note, just as an aside, one of the things that I really love about, and I don't know if all journey circles do this or if this is specific to you, but you also call in the 4 directions. And we call in the 4 directions when we cast a circle, is what it's called, circle casting. And what that does is, kind of coming back to the container that you're talking about, is one, it brings the elements in to participate in what's happening, but also for us, it creates, I call them watchtowers. And it's basically creating a circle of protection around us while we're working, so that we feel that we're safe energetically.
And I would also argue that not only do you feel safe, you are safe.
Yes.
There's the beings that we call in, the elements, the totems, and the energies are real. And by invitation, they are present. And they do help us to hold that container in a sacred and powerful way. So that's another place where what we do in our shamanic community and what you're doing in your witchcraft communities or covens is very, very similar. That leads me to another question. I think of witchcraft writ large comes primarily, I don't know how to say this, but for how I understand it, witchcraft written large originates in Europe, and rather than in Africa or Australia or I don't know. What is the history? Can you kind of elaborate on where I'm wrong?
Yeah. So yes, for the most part, yes and no is the answer. For the most part, when people think of witchcraft, they think of like neo-paganism, which a lot of it does stem from Europe. It stems from, like in Ireland, there's the belief of fairies and elves. And so that's got a very strong fairy magic connection there. I will admit, I don't actually know as much history as I should. I did at one point. Actually, at one point, I was much more well-versed on my history. These days, not so much. I would say what witchcraft really is, from what I understand, at least modern witchcraft, is it is taking what we know of paganism and pagan tribes and recreating it, because a lot of those traditions were, to be honest, obliterated from the church coming in. So like a lot of those traditions were lost. So we can kind of look back and take them and recreate bits and pieces, but we're sort of like archaeologists digging up the bones and trying to cobble together what we think it might have looked like. That being said, I think that that's actually a beautiful thing, because we can recreate it in a way that is pertinent to our time and to what's needed in this generation. But it's not just European, right? So we've got Latin roots, which is, again, I was talking about Santeria, and that is kind of a combination of Catholicism, paganism, but I also believe, and maybe I could be completely wrong, and I should probably do a little research, but my feeling is that it probably is very connected to a lot of Native American practices as well, because you have, kind of the melting pot of all of these practices coming together.
Yeah. A lot of what you said is true. I think for both of our approaches to the world, it's hard to find the real thread, because a lot has been destroyed. And that's historical stuff. I can go for days on that too. But we're having to piece together some things, and again, trying to be really careful not to appropriate from other cultures in such a way that we're making a bunch of stuff up. That's
right.
That's really not to be done.
Right.
But some things resonate and some things don't.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fascinating. I appreciate your insight on that.
Yeah, and I'd like to just tack on a little note regarding that. In terms of witchcraft, there are witches that have like a blood lineage, and they are, there's this long tradition. And I would never obviously ever claim to know about that, because I am not that. And the reason why I've chosen my specific path is because it's something where I don't need to make sure that I'm, not stealing or leeching from a culture. It's very accessible.
Okay, so far we've talked quite a bit about the similarities and differences of our spirituality. We've found that there's places where they overlap quite a lot, and we've also found places where we're talking about the same thing but we're using different words.
Yeah.
Also, we found a little bit of differences here and there. But I think what I'd like to do is to turn our conversation a little bit to what's going on right now.
Okay.
We are sitting here in the middle of a pandemic, a global pandemic, by the way. I mean, it's not unique to any part of this planet, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, we have difficulties with, I don't want to get political, but there's a lot of things going on in the government of the United States in particular that are
Mm-hmm.
causing some chaos. Um, and so there's a lot of issues that are going on, both physical and social and political. Um, how do we look at that as what I'm going to call spiritual leaders or spiritual teachers? How do we think about that? How do we handle that? What are some ways to cope? You know, if somebody came to you and said, "I'm really struggling. I'm anxious all the time. I'm worried about things. I'm hyper vigilant. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go." How would you? This may be unfair, but I'm just going to lay it out there anyway. How would you sort of handle someone asking you those questions?
Yeah, it's a big question, and I have a lot of opinions and ideas on what's happening, why it's happening, but in regards to the person just asking for, what can I do because I'm feeling overwhelmed, I, being somebody who's deeply connected to nature, would suggest what I've been doing, and that's simply turn off your YouTube, turn off your media, turn off your phone, and get outside. Go on a hike, sit under a tree, and just reconnect with the earth and reconnect with nature. Because I think that we're a culture that we're so in our head all the time. And, the media wants us to get in a frenzy because that's how it hooks us and keeps us going back for more, back for more, back for more. And we're a very anxious society. And when you're sitting under a tree and you're breathing and you're feeling the leaves under you and the sun on your skin, that is so deeply healing. And I feel like it reminds us of who we are.
Hmm.
And so I would say get back in nature. Grounding is a huge practice in witchcraft, and I know it is in shamanism as well. Being barefoot, digging your feet into the dirt is a great way to ground and just coming back into your body, into your physical body, and giving yourself space to be quiet and to be still and to be calm. Because again, we're just like all the time pinging all over the place in this culture, and being still is really not something that we value very much. And so when you can give yourself that, I feel like it's like, okay, you might feel the heart fluttering and things keep going, but like eventually, if you just keep breathing and you just keep tuning into your environment, tuning into the trees, tuning into the sounds of the cicada, and just tuning in, you'll notice that you'll start to calm down. So that's one way that I found is really, really effective for me. The other thing is clearing your space. You talked earlier about house clearing. We also practice house clearing, and that doesn't. You don't have to just do that with. Doing that with your house isn't the only thing you can clear with. You can clear your body, you can clear your energy, and you can clear it at any time. So if you're not able to, take a hike and you're in the middle of work, or there are ways that you can actually cleanse your energy. Physical ways include saging, which I know you use, where you burn sage and you can just kind of run it all over the smoke, all over your body, and feel the negative energy kind of being cleared away. But you can also use, in my practice, you can use rosemary, you can use pine, you can burn eucalyptus. Really, there's a lot of herbs that are available to you to burn, or you can even use essential oils, and they do a similar thing. You can even use salt. You can sprinkle salt around you and imagine, the salt pulling and leaching away the negative energy. And if you don't have anything at all, you don't even need tools. Tools are just, like you can actually just take your hands and just pull the energy and feel it coming off of you. So I would say regularly cleansing and clearing yourself, grounding, connecting with nature. Those are all really powerful ways. And then lastly, like just a really practical, not even witchy thing is to connect with friends and connect with people that can kind of get your mind off of things, so that you're not always stuck in, like, what's going on with the pandemic, what's going on with the news, what's going on with this crisis, but that you can remember that, life is multifaceted. There's levity, there's joy, and experience those things. So make sure to reach out to your friends, reach out to people around you, and just say, hey, I'm having a hard time. Can we just joke around? Can we just talk about something that's not serious for a while and get our minds off of things? So those would be my suggestions.
Those are all really, really good suggestions. And some of the things that you were saying are also part of what I would suggest to people as well. Sage and pine and a variety of different aromatics, you can mix those together and burn them as well. But there's also feathering. It's like you use a feather to move through your field. You can even use your hands and just brush yourself. It's equal to pulling, right? Just
yes, yeah.
You can snap your fingers. That helps to dispel the energy around you, or clap your hands. And in terms of grounding, I'm glad she mentioned that too, because one of the practices I used to do with my students would be to take them out into the country and I'd bury them. Putting your feet on the ground and bury your feet is one thing, but imagine digging a trench, laying down in it, and having somebody cover you with dirt and leaves. And they could stay there as long as they wanted to. And my job would be to make sure they don't get stepped on by the local animals. What I found is that people would begin to sort of emerge from their burial after about 45 or 50 minutes. That's kind of the longest that people could go. But as far as I was concerned, you can stay there for hours. As long as I had a good book to read, that would be fine. But that's another thing. I can't do that now because I've lost access to land where I can actually make that happen. So, so being in the dirt and having a skin to earth connection really does help. Salt baths, Epsom salts, and baking soda and those things help the body to let go of some of the physical stuff that the body holds on to as well. So it's not just energetic. It's very physical as well. We feel all that anxiety. It lives in here. And so things like going for a walk, wonderful. Talk to the trees while you're at it. Pay attention to what's going on around you. And what happens is that brings you more present. And whenever you're present, all those worries don't have space to exist.
Right, yeah.
In the present moment, words can stop. And those words that spin around in your head while you're sitting there worrying about things, go for a walk. Pay attention to where the sun is and talk to the squirrel that just is in the path and it's like, just talk. Say, what you got to tell me? And so you can have a conversation with your environment and become more present. The more present you are, the more you'll notice that all those words go away and that you begin to be able to breathe more deeply because the anxiety is kind of bleaching away. Another practice that I like to suggest to people is throwing things, big heavy, because throwing like rocks into the river, into a stand of trees, releases the tension that your body's holding on to right from your core, right? And besides that, you have an effect over there. So you throw a rock and it goes into the water and makes a big splash and you go, I did that, Some of the anxiety that we're experiencing is because we have no control. There's nothing I can do to change the environment or what's going on. I'm kind of in a state of reacting most of the time. So everything you said, I totally agree with. One other thing that might be, and I think is really useful, is to have a practice where on a daily basis, you give yourself a space and time to just be. Some people would call that meditation. Some people would call that journeying. Some people would call that prayer. Or some people just say, I just sit and breathe for a while. Perfect. It's all the same thing. But if you can set a practice of doing that on a regular basis in the same place over and over again, then what happens is that you develop an energetic connection to that space. Your body gets familiar with that space and that time, and it more easily gets into that relaxed space that you're looking for, where you're not spinning. And really turn off the YouTube and don't feed yourself that stuff. Restrict,
unless it's one of our channels.
well, there's that. all the stuff that you say, I endorse 100%.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's what I think we're both really saying, is it's that reconnecting with the body thing is so huge, because it's like, I think that, again, I mean, I feel like I already said this, but I feel like I want to reiterate it. In this culture, we live from the neck up, right. But our real wisdom is from the neck down. And to access, our truth and our wisdom and the healing power of our bodies, we need to connect with our bodies. And so all of these are ways to, move from here down into here. And when we can make that shift, then we are integrating everything, and we're just healthier.
True. And so dance comes to mind.
Yes.
Music, sound, movement are all ways of getting into our physical selves, and not our intellectual selves, where we cause the most trouble.
Right.
I can't think of anything else right now, Zoe. You have anything?
No, I mean, this has been really wonderful. I guess, well, no, I do have one more, just one more. I'm curious, can you, for people who've never experienced a shamanic journey, like the circles that I attended, can you explain what that looks like? Like, if they were to come, what they could expect from it?
Okay. Well, let me talk about the shamanic journey, Clip Notes edition.
Okay.
The shamanic journey is a form of meditation that's done to rhythm. It could be the rhythm of a drum, rattle, sometimes flute, but it has a rhythmic component to it. Arguably, a flute has a more melodic rhythm to it than a drum. Okay. Now, it is a meditative practice, and I will tell you that I'm a failed meditator. I tried for like 2 years to do something like transcendental meditation. After 2 years, I just said, this doesn't work for me, because my brain is like always active. I'm creative as heck. So I just kind of didn't do anything for a long time. And then I ran into this thing called the shamanic journey. What happens is that as you're sitting comfortably or lying on the floor, which is better, and you're playing like an MP3 of a mono-rhythmic drum, between 160 and 240 beats per minute will change your brainwave pattern to a theta state. And a theta state is basically a light trance. Okay, so the physiology of the shamanic journey is such that it helps your body to go into a light trance. And that slows everything down. And in the context of that, you can use your imagination to create a scenario, or you can invite in beings that you might relate to as guides or teachers, and you can have a conversation with them. Now, the conversation may not be in words, or it might be. Often it's not, though. It's more like telepathy. We kind of know what each other's thinking. I can think a question and I can get the answer. So it's much more interactive than meditation, or at least the meditation I was practicing. So I like that, and I can relate to that, because it's kind of like I can build a story of information from a different perspective. And so that right there actually is an entirely different kind of topic. But at its core, the journey process is a way of interacting with what we were talking about earlier, that which is bigger than we are. And because it's interactive, we can build a conversation. And the real key to journeying is your imagination. Just like when we were kids and we could imagine the fairies, we can imagine the things that are in that journey space. And the fairies are real. And so are these beings in the spirit world. Same thing. In fact, I would say that they live with us all the time. And only whenever we slow everything down can we get in touch. Only whenever we intentionally go into that space, and the key is our imagination, we can have that kind of interaction, which would be healing, informative, and life-changing. So that really is the Cliff Notes version. There's a number of books. There's all kinds of information out there about the journey process. Yeah. But I just, it keeps coming to me to say, remember, imagination, imagination, imagination. Imagination is not a lie. I believe humans have an imagination to help us to connect with the spirit world. Think about it, that's really the only reason we'd have it, is to be able to connect out there in the future, or with beings, teachers, guides, guardians that can help us to navigate through this life. So our imagination can arguably be the biggest tool we have in terms of spirituality. Yeah, it seems like it to me.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, even with witchcraft and spellcasting and ritual, I am always saying it's play. It's play. And attached to that is another way of saying that is it's, you know, imagination. You that's the portal. That's the doorway. So I'm super happy that you feel the same and that you help people access that.
Well, I think, Zoe, that what we discovered in this conversation is how much similarity there is between the two traditions that we're practicing. And it's about what resonates most.
Right.
So some of what you're talking about resonates really well, some doesn't. And so what resonates with me is the things that I'm practicing. And the same is true for you. So, and probably everybody that's watching this right now is going, oh, that's what that's about. Okay, I feel it. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm glad that we found our way, beginning in the same place and ending in the same place. We touch space in the middle. So just for myself, I really appreciate your taking the time. I love talking to you. I've appreciated you since the day that you first walked into our Journey Circle space so long ago. I felt you when you came in, and you've been with me ever since. So
thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you. Before we leave, I just would like to give people the opportunity to know where to find you and how to connect with you. So if people want to learn more about your practice and what you do, where can they connect? They
can throw a rock and just about hit me. I'm everywhere. But if you want to go to GerryStarnes.com, that's a good place to begin, and then you'll learn more about me than you want to know. And how about you? How do people find out about what Zoe's up to these days?
Thank you for asking. I'm actually in the middle of starting a business called House of the Wildling, and we are going to be teaching online courses. And our first course is going to be a course on Persephone and the mythology of Persephone. And we're going to be doing shadow work because it's going to happen in the fall. So I'm really excited for that. If you're excited or curious about witchcraft and you want to learn more, you can. The best way right now is to go to my Facebook page and just look up Zoe Sol and connect with me there. I also have a YouTube channel, and you can just go search Zoe Sol on YouTube and you'll find me. Okay, wonderful. I'm glad to hear about this new project that you're undertaking. I think that will be really exciting. Okay. Yeah, okay. I'm excited. I guess that's it for us. And
all right. I guess that'll do it. Thank you for all the folks who are taking a look at our little discussion. And we enjoyed having you. And if you want, send comments to me or however you want to contact us. We're always glad to hear from other people. Okay. Again, thank you, Zoe, and we will
Thank you.
see you sometime really soon, I do hope. Take care.
Yay. Thank you. Thank you, Gerry. Wonderful as always. Much love.
Much love.